Welcome to this trip through one of the most disturbing cases in Little Rock, Arkansas's history. Before we start, please leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is when you're listening to this narration. We want to know where and when these documented accounts go. In the fall of 1840, Little Rock was still a small frontier town along the Arkansas River. A series of events began that would stay hidden in county records for more than 100 years. The Morrow Plantation, which is about 5 miles east of what is now downtown Little Rock, is the main setting for the story. It is also about a man named Solomon Graves, whose life was almost forgotten in history. On the 12th of October 1840, Reverend William Stevenson wrote down the first strange detail in his parish registry. The entry just said, "Called to Morrow Estate, unusual circumstances, no burial performed." This short note might have gone unnoticed if it weren't for what happened in the weeks that followed. Tax records from that year show that the Morrow Plantation, which used to be one of the most productive in Pulaski County, suddenly had a big drop in production. The property was listed as temporarily non-operational by December of that year. What makes this case so disturbing is not what was recorded, but what was purposefully left out of official records. The Morrow family, which included plantation owner Bernard Morrow and his wife Charlotte, were well known in Little Rock. The Arkansas Gazette Society pages talked about their 2-3-year-old daughter, Adeline, a lot during the summer of 1840. Her name is no longer in any public records after September of that year.
County employment records also show that Solomon Graves, a free black man who was a skilled carpenter, stopped showing up on tax and census records after August 1840.
The Arkansas Historical Society has a leather-bound journal that belonged to Dr. James Woodson, Little Rock's main doctor at the time. It was found during renovations to the courthouse in 1963. His note from the 28th of September, 1840, says, "Called to Morrow Plantation about a female patient. Her condition was beyond medical help." The master says it was because she fell down the stairs, but the evidence says otherwise. No further action was taken, as is usual in such cases. The Morrow Plantation was located on what is now the eastern edge of Little Rock, where the Arkansas River and Forche Creek meet. Architectural surveys called the main house a grand 2-story building with 12 rooms, which was not common in Arkansas at the time. Property maps from 1838 showed that the estate had a main house, a separate kitchen building, stables, and 2 rows of cabins that housed about 40 enslaved people who worked in the cotton fields. Before 1840, Bernard Morrow was known as one of the more forward-thinking plantation owners in the area. County records show that he let some of the enslaved people learn trades and sometimes hire out their work in Little Rock. Other plantation owners didn't like this way of doing things, as shown by the minutes from town meetings where Morrow defended his economic approach. Solomon Graves was legally enslaved, but he was able to do some things on his own as a skilled carpenter who could read and write because of this system. Charlotte Morrow, as reported in the papers by Elizabeth Trapnell, the wife of a well-known merchant in Little Rock, was a woman with a weak body but a strong will. In her letters to her sister in Virginia, Mrs. Trapnell talked about how Charlotte kept the household staff in line while also putting on a perfect show of Southern gentility to the people of Little Rock. Adeline, their daughter, went to school in Philadelphia and came back to Little Rock in 1838. The Arkansas Gazette's society pages called her the Jewel of Little Rock Society and said she was a young woman with a lot of intellectual and artistic talent. Her return happened at the same time that some new furniture and architectural pieces arrived for the Morrow home's ongoing expansion. Inventory records show that Bernard Morrow ordered a lot of woodwork for the East Wing addition to the main house. The county clerk's records show that Solomon Graves made a lot of this woodwork, including the intricately carved staircase that was the main feature of the bigger house. There isn't much official information about what happened on the Morrow Plantation in the late summer of 1840. However, some letters found in 1957 while tearing down an old post office building give us some information. Harriet Parker, a distant cousin of Charlotte Morrow who came to the plantation that summer, wrote these letters but never sent them. They were discovered inside a wall cavity in a sealed tin box. In a letter dated the 3rd of August, 1840, Harriet wrote, "Something strange is happening at Morrow Plantation. Adeline spends hours in the new East Wing, supposedly overseeing the final details of the woodwork. Charlotte has been talking about the carpenter, Solomon, more and more and with clear displeasure. Bernard doesn't seem to care, as he is only concerned with the cotton yield predictions. A letter from August 17th says, "The atmosphere in this house gets heavier every day. I saw Adeline talking to the carpenter 3 times this week. Their conversations seemed to be about the woodwork details, but Charlotte could tell that something else was going on. After dinner last night, voices were raised. Bernard's study door stayed closed for hours afterward." The last letter, dated September 2nd, says only, "I'm leaving tomorrow. What I saw tonight near the old oak by the creek can't be put into words. Charlotte's face when she got back to the house will haunt me forever. I told her what I saw was probably a misunderstanding, but her eyes showed she didn't believe me. I'm scared of what might happen next. It is only possible to put together what happened in the weeks that followed from incomplete sources." The ledger of Simeon Johnson, who ran the ferry across the Arkansas River, says on September 25th, "Unusual movement from Morrow Plantation after midnight. Wagon with covered cargo. No questions asked, as per Mr. Morrow's standing instructions." Dr. Woodson's journal entry from September 28th, which we talked about before, suggests that something bad happened to someone. The next entry, on October 4th, says only, "Morrow matter concluded. Sheriff Davis told me that no more medical paperwork was needed." Later on, a source discovered the most disturbing evidence. Workers digging for a new county administrative building in 1952 found a small metal box buried about 6 feet deep. There was a folded piece of parchment inside that looked like a letter written in a careful, educated hand. The Arkansas State Archives confirmed that the document is from the 1842nd, but they don't know the exact date. The letter begins without salutation. "If this account is found, know that injustice has been buried alongside truth. I, Solomon Graves, being of sound mind but desperate circumstance, hereby attest to the events that have transpired at Morrow Plantation. Miss Adeline and I have committed no sin before God, though man's law would condemn our association. We spoke only of books, of ideas, of a world different from this one. When discovered in conversation by Mrs. Morrow near the creekside oak, the fury unleashed was immediate. I am held now in the root cellar, awaiting whatever fate awaits me. Miss Adeline has been confined to her room for 3 days. The shouting from the main house suggests her condition deteriorates. I write this in haste, as Mr. Carpenter, who brings me water, has agreed to conceal this testimony somewhere it might eventually be found. May God have mercy where man has shown none." The letter ends abruptly. No signature is present, suggesting it was interrupted or that the final portion was lost. No official record exists of what happened to Solomon Graves. There is no death certificate, burial record, or proof of sale. Adeline Morrow's fate is also unclear in the same way. The Arkansas Gazette from the 5th of November, 1840, has the most important piece of evidence. It has a small notice that says, "The Morrow family announces with regret that Miss Adeline Morrow has been sent to live with relatives in France due to health concerns made worse by the Arkansas climate. The family asks for privacy during this difficult time. There are no passenger lists from New Orleans to France that show Adeline Morrow as a passenger in 1840 or 1841. The Morrow family papers that Bernard Morrow's grandnephew gave to the Arkansas Historical Society in 1912 do not include any letters from France about her arrival. If it weren't for the work of Professor Sarah Caldwell at the University of Arkansas in 1968, the story might have stayed completely hidden. She was looking into antebellum architecture when she found out about the unique woodwork that had been saved from the Morrow Plantation before it was torn down in 1921. The Arkansas State Museum had kept a number of items, such as parts of a staircase and wall panels. Professor Caldwell's study of these architectural features uncovered something strange. There were small, almost invisible symbols and letters hidden in the intricate carvings on the stair banister. When written down and looked at, they seemed to be a kind of coded message. The initials S and A were intertwined in a way that made them look like decorative flourishes at first glance. Most importantly, there was an inscription on the bottom of one stair tread that was carefully carved so that it would be hidden except when the tread was taken off or fixed. It read, "Two souls bound by mind, separated by circumstance. SG for AM, summer 1840. The Morrow Plantation site itself gave one last piece of proof.
When the land was surveyed for commercial development in 1965, ground-penetrating radar found something strange near where the east wing of the house used to be. Limited archaeological digging found a small, unmarked grave with human remains in it. The archaeological report said that the burial looked rushed and not very neat. There were signs of trauma to the skull and neck vertebrae on the skeleton. Carbon dating put the burial between 1,840 and 1,845. There was never a clear identification, because DNA testing wasn't available at the time. A simple marker that said unknown circa 1,840 was put on the remains when they were reburied in the Little Rock Cemetery. The case file was closed in 1968, and the official conclusion said that the remains were probably those of an unidentified plantation worker. Bernard Morrow ran his plantation until he died in 1862 during the Civil War. Charlotte Morrow lived for 12 more years after him. She eventually moved to Memphis to live with her sister. There are no records of either of them ever talking about their daughter or the events of 1,840 inches public. After the Civil War, the Morrow plantation changed owners a few times. The once grand house had fallen into disrepair by the time the century turned. People who lived nearby started to avoid the property, especially the area where the East Wing used to be. Folklorists gathered stories from people in the area in the 1,930 seconds that talked about strange feelings and sounds of distress around the old foundation stones. One account, written down by an old man named William Jefferson who worked on land nearby as a young man in the 1,880 seconds, said, "Old Morrow Place wasn't right, especially when you'd work near where that fancy east part used to be. Like somebody watching. Sometimes sounded like wood creaking, like somebody on them stairs that wasn't there no more. White folks said it was just old stories, but anybody who worked that land knew better. Something happened there that the earth don't forget." In 1919, a developer bought the land with the intention of splitting it up into smaller lots for homes. During the first clearing, workers are said to have stopped when they found what they called unusual markings carved into the few remaining foundation stones of the East Wing. The developer eventually gave up on the project, but not because of worker superstitions. They said it was because of money problems. Until 1950, the land was still empty. That year, it was bought for industrial use. Through the 1,950 seconds, the night security staff at the warehouse on the site had a lot of turnover. Reports of incidents often talked about strange noises and cold spots near the northeast corner of the building. After a fire whose cause was never found, the warehouse was torn down in 1968. A commercial distribution center now stands on the land where the Morrow plantation used to be. Some employees have said that strange things happen in some parts of the building, especially near where the east wing of the original house would have been. Management says these stories are just normal building noises and the power of suggestion. We will never be completely sure of what happened between Solomon Graves and Adeline Morrow in the summer of 1,840. There is evidence that an enslaved craftsman had a relationship with the daughter of his enslaver, which was against the strict social rules of the time. It is uncertain whether their relationship was romantic or intellectual. However, Solomon's concealed message in the staircase implies a profound emotional connection. It is evident that the events led to the erasure of both individuals from historical documentation, with indications of at least one violent demise and deliberate obfuscation by the Morrow family. The story is one of many lost histories from America's troubled past, when people with power and privilege could erase lives and bury truths. A small plaque was put up in Little Rock's Riverfront Park in 2008 that said, "In memory of those whose stories were silenced, their truths may be unearthed by time." Local historians think this is a subtle way of recognizing the stories of Solomon Graves and Adeline Morrow and others like them, even though it doesn't name them directly. The fact that the truth almost got lost to history is probably the most haunting part of this case. If it weren't for a hidden letter, hidden carvings, and the hard work of researchers more than 100 years later, the events at Morrow Plantation would have stayed buried. Like so many other stories from that dark time in American history, people who go to the site today say that nothing strange happens there. There are no ghosts that walk around where the Morrow Plantation used to be. The real horror is not in ghosts, but in how cruel people can be, how they can silence voices, and how they can hide truths that go against the stories that those in power want to tell. As one researcher said in the last paragraph of her 1,968 report on the case, the most disturbing part of the Graves-Morrow mystery is not what we know happened, but how well those who could have hidden the truth did so. One wonders how many other stories like this are still hidden, with their participants forgotten and their wrongs unacknowledged. The records pertaining to this case were stored away and mostly forgotten until 1952. The Arkansas Historical Society has a small collection of evidence, such as pictures of Solomon's woodwork and a copy of his unfinished letter. Not many people ask to see these things, and even fewer know what they mean. There may be more evidence waiting to be found in an archive that hasn't been fully looked at yet or in soil that hasn't been turned yet. Until then, the whispered story of Solomon Graves and Adeline Morrow reminds us that history is often written by those who live to tell it, while the voices of others are silenced, sometimes for good. In 1963, an old woman named Margaret Wilson called the Arkansas Historical Society and said she had a family Bible that belonged to her grandmother. This was the last creepy part of the story. There was a pressed flower and a handwritten note in it that said, "A sends this from her new room. The air is cool here. The door is always locked." When researchers set up a meeting with Mrs. Wilson to look at this possible evidence, they found out that she had died suddenly. There was no sign of the family Bible among her things, so the mystery lives on, like footsteps on a staircase that no longer exists. Dr. Thomas Bennett, a history professor who specializes in Arkansas before the Civil War, got an odd package from a former student in 1965. While cleaning out his grandmother's attic in Memphis after she died, the student found a small wooden box with the initials C.M. cut into the top. There were some personal things inside, like a tarnished silver hairbrush, some faded ribbons, and a small leather-bound journal. Charlotte Morrow owned the journal. Dr. Bennett's next paper, which came out in a small academic journal in 1967, showed that Charlotte Morrow's private writings were very different from the public records. The journal, which covered the months of August to December 1840, had entries that gave new information about what happened at the Morrow plantation. On August 25, I wrote, "I saw A with that man again today. They were talking about the woodwork patterns, and it seemed like a normal conversation. But there is something in her eyes when she talks to him that really bothers me. Bernard won't listen to my concerns and says I'm imagining something wrong where there isn't any. He thinks the man's craftsmanship is too good to be true." Charlotte's entries become more and more upset by early September. A. Wasn't at breakfast again today. When I went to her room, her bed was undisturbed. I found her in the east wing, looking at the new staircase banister with him. They were too close together. Their hands touched as she traced the pattern of his carving. When they saw me, they moved apart so quickly that no explanation could make sense. I told Esther to let me know right away if A leaves her room after dark. The entry from September 23rd contains the most revealing and disturbing passage. What happened tonight cannot be undone. When A did not appear for dinner, I went to search for her. The house was empty. A lantern was moving near the old oak by the creek. I followed. What I witnessed there, between my daughter and that man, has seared itself into my mind. I returned to the house and informed Bernard. His rage was terrifying. He summoned Thomas and William from the stables. They went out with rope and clubs. They returned with him an hour later. A was brought back separately. She fought like one possessed. She screams still from the room where we have confined her. Bernard says we must wait until she is calmer before determining our course of action. The man is secured below. Bernard has sent word to Dr. Woodson regarding A's nervous condition. The last note about the matter, dated October 1st, is short. It is done. A now understands that she must accept our decision. The story of her departure for France has been arranged. She will be taken to the place we have prepared tomorrow. Dr. Woodson has given her medicine to make her trip easier. As for the other matter, Bernard took care of it himself last night. The ferry was used. The river keeps secrets better than men. Dr. Bennett said in his paper that the rest of the journal entries don't say anything more about Adeline or Solomon. Charlotte's writing becomes more and more broken up over the next few months. She talks about hearing movement in the East Wing and A's voice calling from empty rooms. She says in December that she is taking more and more laudanum to help her sleep. The Bennett paper caused a small stir in the academic world, but it was never widely reported. The Morrow family descendants, who still have a lot of power in Arkansas society, are said to have pushed the university to limit the spread of the findings. The next year, Dr. Bennett was turned down for tenure and moved to a university in the Pacific Northwest, where he stopped looking into the Morrow case. Charlotte's journal mentions a place prepared for Adeline, but it wasn't until 1972, when renovations were being done at the old Arkansas State Asylum, that architectural plans from 1840 were found. These plans showed that Bernard Morrow had paid for and ordered the construction of a private room in the asylum's north wing. On the 2nd of October 1840, an admission record listed a new patient only as A.M. and said, melancholia and moral derangement, treatment, isolation, and quiet. Monthly payment records show that Bernard Morrow gave a lot of money for this patient's special care until he died in 1862. Charlotte kept making the payments until she died in 1874. The patient record stopped suddenly in April 1875 with the words, "Patient A.M. deceased, no family to notify, interred in asylum grounds per standing arrangement." In 1911, the asylum grounds were turned into a public park. There were no markers or records left behind to show where the bodies were buried. A.M. lived in the North Wing, was reportedly housed, was destroyed by fire in 1893, killing 15 patients and 2 staff members. Newspapers from the time say that the fire started in a private room in the North Corridor and quickly spread through the old wooden building. In 1978, workers who were laying pipe on the grounds of the old asylum found human bones about 3 feet below the surface. An archaeological study found that the remains belonged to a woman who was between 50 and 60 years old. There was a small wooden carving of the initials S and A intertwined with the body, which was one of the few personal items found with the body. The carving looked like it had been used a lot over the years, which is what the wear on it showed. The Arkansas State Forensic Anthropologist report noted strange things about the burial. The deceased appears to have been interred while restrained. Evidence of iron manacles remains on both wrists and ankles. Such restraint in burial is unprecedented in our records of asylum practices, suggesting punitive measures extending beyond death. Additional anomalies include the presence of a locked door hasp secured to the crude pine coffin, an unusual measure suggesting fear that the deceased might otherwise escape confinement. This discovery sparked new interest in the Morrow plantation case. Robert Jackson, an amateur historian, started gathering oral histories from older people whose families had ties to the old plantation system. A 1979 account from Eliza Davis, who was then 98 years old, told a disturbing family story that had been passed down through the years. "My great-great-grandmother worked as a house servant in the Morrow house. She told my grandmother, who told my mother, who told me about the summer when Miss Adeline and the carpenter man, Solomon, would meet in secret. They wasn't doing nothing wrong, my great-grandmother always said, just talking about books and ideas. Miss Adeline taught Solomon more reading, and he made beautiful things for her from wood. But Miss Charlotte, she saw something evil in it. After that night when everything went wrong, my great-great-grandmother was one of the servants who had to clean Miss Adeline's room. She said there was scratch marks all over the inside of the door where Miss Adeline tried to get out. They kept her locked up for days. The men took Solomon away at night. Nobody ever saw him again. When they finally brought the doctor, he gave Miss Adeline something that made her sleep. They told everyone she was going to France, but my great-grandmother saw them put her in a closed carriage with Mr. Morrow. They left before dawn and came back after dark. Mr. Morrow was alone when he returned. After that, nobody was allowed in the East Wing where Solomon had done all his woodwork. They closed it up completely by 1841. My great-great-grandmother said Miss Charlotte would walk the hallway outside the East Wing at night. Sometimes they'd hear her talking, like she was having a conversation with somebody who wasn't there. Harold Thompson, a descendant of Simeon Johnson who ran the ferry mentioned in earlier records, gave the most disturbing oral account. The story of his family, which was written down in 1981, suggested a much worse fate for Solomon Graves. My great-great-grandfather ran the ferry across the Arkansas River for 30 years. He kept a private log, separate from his business records. In that log, passed down through our family, there's an entry from September 1840 that describes Bernard Morrow arriving at the ferry landing late at night with a wagon. 2 of his overseers were with him. They had something large wrapped in canvas in the wagon bed. They paid triple the usual fare for a crossing, with the understanding that my ancestor would immediately forget what he saw. According to the story, when they reached the middle of the river, Morrow and his men dumped what was in the canvas into the water. My ancestor wrote that he heard a sound as it hit the water that haunted him for years afterward. The private log describes it as not the splash of something dead, but the panicked thrashing of something still living, bound but conscious. Before they returned to the shore, Morrow told my great-great-grandfather that if he ever spoke of what happened, he would suffer the same fate. That crossing was referenced in our family as the night the ferry carried 5 over but only 4 back. My grandfather said that his grandfather would never cross that stretch of river after dark for the rest of his life. It is still impossible to tell if this story is true or if it has been changed over the years. Thompson said that the private log was destroyed in a house fire in the 1930 seconds, and the only proof left is what people have said. Dredging was done on the Arkansas River near Little Rock in 1984 to make the channel deeper for commercial shipping. One of the things that was found on the riverbed was a set of rusty iron handcuffs attached to a heavy iron weight. The handcuffs looked like they had been locked around people's wrists when they went under. The ironwork was dated to the middle of the 1800s by metallurgical analysis. The Arkansas State Museum briefly put these items on display as part of an exhibit about the river trade's dark past, but they took them down after several well-known families complained. Museum records say that the manacles were put away and then lost during a reorganization of the facility in 1989. In 1991, architectural historians took detailed photos of the remaining Morrow woodwork in the state archives. This may be the most chilling piece of evidence. With new imaging techniques, they found that the intricate carvings on the staircase banister, when seen in certain lighting conditions, showed not only the previously noted intertwined S and A initials, but also a whole message worked into the decorative pattern. Dr. Elizabeth Morton's paper in the Journal of Architectural History described the finding. The carvings, when viewed as a continuous narrative rather than individual decorative elements, spell out a message that can only be fully perceived when one traces the banister from bottom to top. The message reads, "When they discover our minds have met, they will separate our bodies." If you read this, and I am gone, know that what we created here cannot be undone by them. Look for me in the work of my hands. The woodwork, created before the tragic events described in other sources, suggests Solomon Graves anticipated the reaction their relationship would provoke. It also indicates his determination to leave a lasting testament to whatever bond existed between himself and Adeline Morrow. That his message remained hidden in plain sight for over 150 years speaks to both his craftsmanship and his understanding of how future generations might eventually decode what his contemporaries could not. Ground-penetrating radar surveys of the old Morrow Plantation site in 2003 found more strange things below what would have been the east wing of the house. Limited digging by archaeologists found the foundation stones of what looked like a small hidden room below the main floor. There were pieces of paper in the debris that looked like pages ripped from books and had been kept dry in the sealed space. Carbon dating put the paper in the 1800s. The handwriting analysis of the marginalia on some fragments showed that 2 different people were writing to each other in the margins of the text. One hand, which was identified as feminine based on the style of writing at the time, wrote, "Is not freedom of the mind the first and most essential liberty?" The second hand, which was more carefully formed, as if by someone who was more deliberate about writing, replied, "The mind once enlightened cannot again become dark." These fragments, probably showing the conversations between Adeline and Solomon, are the only direct proof of what their relationship was like. The fact that these conversations happened in the margins of books suggests both caution and closeness, a private conversation that took place through the medium of shared texts. The chamber itself was about 6 feet by 8 feet and showed signs of regular use, such as the remains of a small table, bits of candle wax, and a wooden chair. The fact that its entrance was hidden and could only be reached through what would have been a sliding panel in the main staircase suggests that it was meant to be a secret meeting place. We don't know if Bernard Morrow knew about this room when he asked for the east wing to be built. People were less interested in the Morrow Graves case again by 2005. The story became little more than a footnote in academic studies of antebellum race relations. It was only sometimes mentioned in specialized publications and was mostly forgotten by the general public. The land where the plantation used to be has been built on many times, and now it is home to a commercial warehouse complex that is still in use. Night security guards at the facility sometimes see strange things, like cold spots that don't make sense, footsteps on wooden stairs that don't exist, and most often, the feeling of being watched from empty corners. Management says these reports are due to the power of suggestion and the fact that night shift work is done alone. There has been no official investigation into these claims. During the expansion of the warehouse in 2012, construction workers found another strange thing: a small underground spring that had been covered with stone on purpose in the 1800s. After the cap was taken off, workers said that the water ran red for a few minutes before clearing up. Environmental testing showed that there was no contamination or minerals that could explain the color change. People in the area quickly linked this event to the Morrow Graves story, saying it was a sign that the land remembered what had happened there. In 2017, the Arkansas Historical Society got an anonymous gift of a small wooden box that was the last piece of this disturbing historical puzzle. There was a piece of what looked like a journal page inside, protected by two pieces of glass. The writing looked like Charlotte Morrow's known writing. The fragment had only one paragraph. "I hear them at night now, both of them. His footsteps on the stairs he built, her voice calling from behind the walls. Bernard says it is my guilt speaking to me through my weakness. He has forbidden me from entering the East Wing entirely. The servants refuse to clean there. Bernard says we will close that section of the house permanently after the new year. I know what awaits me if I speak of what really happened that night, but I fear what awaits me regardless, for they have found ways to remain." Last night I heard A's voice as clearly as if she stood beside me. She said only, "Mother, you have buried us, but we are not gone." Forensic tests showed that the paper and ink were from the 1,840 seconds. We still don't know where the fragment came from or who gave it to us. The Arkansas Historical Society put the item in the Morrow collection, where it is still available to researchers only by special request. The story of Solomon Graves and Adeline Morrow is more than just a local ghost story or a historical curiosity. It shows how the power structures of the past could really erase some stories from history, bury lives and stories, and silence voices. That bits of their story have come out over the course of almost 2 centuries shows how strong the truth is, even if it takes a long time to come out. Dr. Morton wrote in the conclusion of her 2001 paper on the case, "The true horror of the Morrow Graves story lies not in any supernatural element, but in the very human capacity for cruelty in defense of social boundaries. What happened to these 2 individuals, one a privileged white woman, the other an enslaved black man, reveals the extent to which those in power would go to maintain the racial hierarchies upon which their world was built. That we can piece together their story today owes everything to Solomon's foresight in leaving evidence within his craftsmanship, and perhaps to Adeline's persistence in ensuring her story was not entirely erased. The old Morrow plantation land is now home to a warehouse that is open all day and night. People who work the night shift still sometimes talk about strange things that happen. A security guard who asked to remain anonymous when interviewed in 2022 talked about his experience. "I've worked the night shift for 15 years. I'm not superstitious, but there's something about the northeast corner of this building. Nobody likes to go there alone after midnight. Sometimes you hear what sounds like someone working with wood, tapping, scraping. Other times it sounds like someone walking slowly downstairs, except there are no stairs there. The weird thing is, it doesn't feel threatening. It feels like someone is still working, still creating something, like they're not finished yet. Maybe they aren't. Maybe the story of Solomon Graves and Adeline Morrow is still being written piece by piece, as time reveals what people tried to hide. Their voices, almost lost to history, still faintly echo through the things they left behind. Carved wood, hidden rooms, the edges of books, and the memory of a place that won't let go of what happened there. A small display case in the Arkansas Historical Society's archives holds the few physical pieces of their story. A piece of Solomon's letter, pictures of the carved staircase detail, the wooden carving found with Adeline's likely remains, and now Charlotte's journal fragment. Not many people ask to see these things. Even fewer comprehend the entirety of the narrative they embody. But for those who can put together this historical puzzle, the most disturbing thing is not what happened to Solomon and Adeline. Even though it was horrible, the real horror is realizing how easily their story could have been lost forever, and how power and privilege can hide the truth, silence dissenting voices, and bury proof of their own wrongdoing. It reminds us that history isn't just what happened, it's also what people were allowed to remember. And in that reminder is maybe the most disturbing question of all. How many other Solomons and Adelines are buried under the weight of histories written by people who keep them quiet? What other stories are still hidden, with no names for the people involved and no recognition of the wrongs done? The Morrow Plantation is no longer there. Its buildings have been torn down, and its grounds have been used for other things. But some of what happened there still lives on. In bits of evidence, in the reports of people who work there, and now in this story. Listen closely, and you might hear what the night shift workers say. The sound of someone still working with wood, still making things, and leaving clues that might be found someday. The sound of people who weren't allowed to tell their own stories, writing history. For those who want to look closely enough, the most disturbing slave mystery in Little Rock history isn't a mystery at all. It shows how far power will go to protect itself, and how the truth will always come out, no matter how hard people try to hide it. And maybe that's the most important lesson to take away from this troubling case. Truth, like the river that Solomon was said to have been thrown into, keeps going. Things that are hidden may come to light. Things that are buried may one day be found. People who have been silenced may eventually find ways to speak. Just listen in the quiet hours and empty spaces where history is waiting to be heard. They are still talking.